Only if you promise not to cry. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a dojo just before something important happens. Not silence exactly, more like a held breath. Margaret Ellison knew that quiet well. She'd spent 31 years building it, training in it, teaching young men and women to respect it. That Tuesday afternoon, the quiet was about to be broken by a mistake she didn't yet know she was making. The Ellison Dojo sat on the corner of Fairview and 9th, in a part of town that had seen better decades, though Margaret had never let that matter much. 8th degree black belt, Aikido mostly, though she'd cross-trained in enough disciplines that nobody questioned her credentials anymore. They hadn't questioned them in a long time, not since she'd quietly become one of the wealthiest women in the state. After the security systems company she'd founded in her 30s got bought out by a firm nobody had heard of and everybody respected. Money hadn't changed the dojo much. She still taught the Tuesday and Thursday classes herself. She still believed, the way her own teacher had taught her 40 years ago, that strength was something you offered to others, not something you used against them. So when she saw Daniel Whitfield standing near the back wall that afternoon, holding his son's hand, she felt something she didn't often feel anymore: curiosity. He wasn't dressed for the dojo. He wore a canvas apron, the kind bakers wear, dusted faintly with flour at the hem, like he'd come straight from work without thinking to change. His son, a boy of maybe 4, stood close against his leg, clutching a small stuffed bear with one ear gone soft and gray from years of holding. Margaret had seen 1,000 fathers bring their children to watch a class. This felt different, though she couldn't say why. Maybe it was the way he watched her students move through their forms, and not with admiration exactly, but with something more like recognition, the way you watch a song you used to know. She finished the class, dismissed her students with a bow, and crossed the mat toward him. "You're not here for a lesson," she said. It wasn't quite a question. "No, ma'am," Daniel said. "Tobias here wanted to watch. He likes the noise, the shouting, the falling down. Says it sounds like thunder that doesn't hurt anybody." Margaret looked down at the boy. Tobias looked back up at her with the particular fearlessness that only very small children and very old people seem to possess. "Thunder that doesn't hurt anybody," she repeated. That's a fine way to put it. She didn't know, not yet, that Daniel had been a competitive wrestler in college. 2-time conference champion, before a knee injury, and then 2 years later, a far worse injury, the kind that doesn't show up on any scan. When his wife passed during a difficult delivery, leaving him alone with a newborn and a grief he carried, the way some men carry their fathers, watches, quietly, every day, without complaint. She didn't know he'd given up wrestling, given up most things, and opened a small bakery 3 blocks from the dojo so he could keep his hours. Flexible enough to be the one who picked Tobias up from preschool every single afternoon. She only knew what she saw. A big, soft-spoken man in a flour-dusted apron, holding his son's hand like it was the only thing anchoring him to the earth. And something about that, something about the ease of him, the gentleness, made her smile in a way she would later regret. Not an unkind smile, just a confident one. "You look like you've got some size on you," she said. "Ever trained?" "A long time ago," Daniel said. "Care to spar?" "Nothing serious. Just to give the boy something to watch." There was a pause. The kind of pause that, looking back, Margaret would recognize as the universe giving her one last chance to reconsider. Daniel knelt down to Tobias's eye level first. "You want to watch Daddy practice for a minute, bud?" Tobias nodded, solemn as a judge, and clutched his bear a little tighter. Daniel stood, rolled his shoulders once, the way a man does when he's testing whether an old door still swings on its hinges. "All right," he said, and then with the faintest smile, the kind that didn't show his teeth but reached all the way to his eyes. "Only if you promise not to cry." Margaret laughed, a real laugh. Surprised out of her, and several of her remaining students, the ones who'd lingered to put their gear away, turned to watch. What happened over the next 4 minutes has been told a few different ways around that part of town, depending on who's doing the telling. But the people who were actually there, the ones folding their belts by the wall, agree on the important parts. Daniel didn't fight like a man who'd forgotten his training. He fought like a man who'd buried it somewhere safe and was only now, gently, digging it back up. Margaret came at him with the speed and precision that had made her a legend in 3 states. And Daniel met her not with aggression, but with something quieter. A kind of patient strength. He let her momentum carry itself most of the way, then redirected it, not to throw her, not to win, but simply to neutralize. Twice he caught her wrist before her strike landed and simply held it. The way you'd hold a door for someone and let her step back. He wasn't trying to beat her. That much was obvious to everyone watching. He was trying not to hurt her while also somehow not letting himself be hurt either. It was the strangest kind of sparring Margaret had done in years, like dancing with someone who already knew the song. By the 3rd minute, she was breathing harder than she expected to be. By the 4th, she stepped back, raised a hand, and called it. "Where?" she said, hands on her hips, chest rising and falling. "Did you learn to move like that?" Daniel glanced over at his son, who was watching with wide, delighted eyes, bouncing slightly on his heels. "College," he said simply. "Long time ago. Different life." Margaret studied him for a long moment. Not with embarrassment. She was too old and too secure in herself for that, but with something like respect recalibrating itself in real time. "You let me get close on purpose," she said. "Those last 2 exchanges? You could have ended it sooner." "Didn't want to make it look easy," Daniel admitted. "Tobias likes a good show." And there it was again, and that smile. Not smug, not proud, just warm, like a porch light left on for somebody coming home late. Margaret offered him a position that week. Not as a black belt, not yet. He'd need to test. To recertify, to put in the hours he'd let lapse for 10. Years of single fatherhood and 4 a.m. bread proofing. But she offered him a place on her mat. 3 evenings a week with Tobias welcome to sit in the corner with his bear and watch the thunder that didn't hurt anybody. Daniel said yes, on one condition, that Tobias could come every single time, no exceptions, even on nights the boy fell asleep against the wall before the class ended. "Of course," Margaret said. "What kind of dojo doesn't have room for a sleepy 4-year-old? Over the months that followed, something quietly reshaped itself in that building on Fairview and 9th. Margaret, who had spent 3 decades training bodies into discipline, found herself learning something from Daniel that no instructor had ever taught her. That real strength doesn't announce itself. That a man could carry grief, the size of a continent, and still kneel down every afternoon to ask his son how his day had been. That gentleness and power were not opposites. Not even cousins twice removed. They were, in the right person, the very same thing. She started inviting Daniel to help with the youngest students, 5- and 6-year-olds who were too small for hard contact, but old enough to learn balance, patience, the simple dignity of falling down and getting back up. Daniel was a natural with them, in the way only someone who has truly listened to a small child can be. He didn't talk down to them. He knelt to their level, the way he always knelt to Tobias, and he made the thunder sound like something safe. Tobias, for his part, grew up half in a bakery and half on a dojo mat, which is, Margaret would later say, about as good a childhood as a boy could ask for. Flour and falling and a father who showed up for every single bit of it. Years later, and this part of the story tends to get told a little softer, a little slower by whoever's telling it, Margaret stood at the back of that same dojo and watched a teenage Tobias, 16 now, lanky and quiet like his father, walk through his black belt test. Daniel stood beside her, arms crossed, watching with the stillness of a man trying very hard not to let his face do what his heart was doing. When Tobias bowed at the end, and the room erupted into applause, Margaret glanced sideways and caught Daniel quickly wiping at his eye with the back of his hand. "You're not crying, are you?" she asked, echoing gently all those years back. Daniel laughed, soft and a little rough. "Only if you promise not to tell anyone." And Margaret, who had built an empire and trained champions and never, once in 30 years, let her own composure slip in, front of a student, found that her eyes weren't entirely dry either. Some lessons, it turns out, aren't about who wins the sparring match. They're about who shows up afterward, every single day, with flour on their hands and a small boy at their side, asking nothing more than a little room on the mat. That, Margaret had come to believe, was the truest kind of strength there was. Not the kind that knocks someone down. The kind that kneels,